Welcome to Etcha, I'm Ben, and today I'm going to tell you 3 creepy fairy tales. There once was a miller who had a beautiful daughter, and it was high time she be wed. So the miller decided that the first respectable chap to come along would marry his daughter. The next day, a chap came along who seemed respectable enough, and the miller set the date for the wedding. A few weeks later, the miller's daughter and Mr. Respectable were hanging out. Now, the miller's daughter had a bad feeling about Mr. Respectable, but she still hung out with him for some odd reason. Mr. Respectable invited her out to a cabin in the woods the following weekend. The miller's daughter protested, saying, "I'm gonna get lost in the woods. It's dark and scary and there might be werewolves." And he said, "Don't worry. I'm going to throw some ashes on the ground, make a trail, you'll make it there just fine." And she said, "Okay." So that weekend, the miller's daughter set out through the woods, followed the ash trail to a door in a cabin in the woods. She went through the door, and behind the door was a bird in a cage. And it screeched, "Turn back! Get out! Go home! Take care! This is a murderer's house! Beware!" And she didn't take care. She kept walking through the house, searching room for her new beloved. And she found nobody. So she, like all smart people do, went down into the basement. Smart. Cabin in the woods, and you go down into the basement. Back in a day when we didn't have electricity. So she goes down into the basement and finds an old woman. This old woman turns and says, "What are you doing here?" And the girl said, "Isn't this Mr. Respectable's house?" And the old lady said, "Mr. Respectable isn't so respectable. He's a cannibal." And so the old lady said, "Well, here, I'll hide you until after they leave or fall asleep, and then we'll escape." As smart as the miller's daughter is, she agreed. So she hid behind this giant barrel. And as soon as she hid, Mr. Respectable comes marching in with a whole bunch of his buddies, dragging a maiden behind him. And they strip the maiden and throw her on the table and start making her drink wine. First red, then white, then yellow, and then her heart bursts open and she dies. No, it really happened like that. The guys decide that they're going to eat her. So they chop her up into little pieces, salt her, and throw her in a pot. Now, while they were chopping her up, one of the men noticed a ring on her finger. As he chopped it off, the ring and the finger flew over his shoulder, landing in the miller's daughter's lap. The miller's daughter quickly pockets this little heirloom, and the old hag rescues her by saying, "Hey, why don't we throw this meat into the soup now? Quickly, let's do it. You can find that ring later." And the guy, as drunk as he was, said, "Yeah, sure, of course, I'll find it tomorrow, after it's rotten." And as soon as they're all out cold, the miller's daughter and the old hag run away and tell the miller the whole story. They decide to proceed with the wedding. One caveat: this is actually a trial. The miller's daughter, at the wedding, stands up on a table and looks towards Mr. Respectable and says, "I had a dream last night," and spills all the beans of what she saw. And then at the very end of the story, she brandishes a finger. With a ring. And Mr. Respectable jumps up and runs away, and everybody dogpiles him. And they drag him and his buddies out into the courtyard and slaughter them. The end! Thank you very much. The Tale of the Grandmother. There once was a woman who had some bread and milk and told her daughter to carry it off to her grandmother. So the little girl runs off into the woods and comes upon a werewolf and doesn't freak out for some reason. And the werewolf asks her where she's going. And the little girl replies, "I'm going to take this bread and this milk to my grandmother." And the werewolf says, "Well, which way are you going? Down the pins road or down the needles road?" And she says, "Well, I'm going to go down the needles road." And he says, "Okay, well, I'll take the pins road because that's faster." And the little girl says, "Okay," and starts walking down the road picking up needles. And the werewolf gets to the house first and kills the grandmother, cuts off a bit of her flesh, puts a little bit of drip, drip, drip blood in a bottle, and puts it in the cupboard. And then he dresses in Granny's clothes and jumps in bed. And the little girl, and she goes, "Knock, knock, knock. Who is it?" "It's your granddaughter," says the little girl. "Well, come in. You can have some of the meat I cooked and some of that wine in the cupboard." "Okay, Grandma, I brought you some bread and some milk." So she comes in and eats this odd-tasting meal and drinks this very odd-tasting wine, but doesn't think anything of it. She trusts her grandmother so implicitly. And the werewolf grandmother man thing in the bed says, "Okay, honey, take off your shirt." "Oh, what should I do with my shirt?" "Throw it in the fire." "Now, take off your pants." "What should I do with my pants?" "Throw it in the fire." "Take off your underwear." "What should I do with my underwear?" "Throw it in the fire." All of a sudden, she's naked, and this werewolf says, "Hey, get into bed with me." No, that's really what happened. This tale is getting creepier and creepier. And she crawls into bed with grandmother werewolf thing and says, "Wow, you're really hairy, Grandma. Oh, the better to keep warm. What long nails you have, Grandma. Oh, just to scratch my itches better. What big shoulders you have. All the better to carry kindling to my fire to keep me warm at night. What big ears you have, Grandma. The better to hear you with, my child. You know I'm going deaf. Oh, Grandmother, what big mouth you have. All the better to eat you with, my child. Oh, Grandmother, I need to go outside to relieve myself." "Do it in the bed, my child." "No, Grandmother, I want to go outside. It's gross doing it in the bed." "All right, but don't stay long." And the werewolf tied a little string around the little naked girl's foot. And of course the girl unties the string and ties it to a tree because the werewolf really isn't that smart for a werewolf. And she runs away. And then he roars at the end. The Woman Who Was Skinned Alive. There once was a king who loitered around other men's castles. And he was loitering around this one castle, and he heard the voices of these pretty ladies on the other side of the wall. And he fell in love. One of them, after she stuck her little fingers out through a keyhole, he begged her to lie with him, because of course he's a king, and you know, that's what kings do. She agrees, but only on one condition, that they do it at night, because she is such a modest person. The king rushes back to his castle and waits, all you know. Meanwhile, back at the other castle, the two pretty ladies behind the wall weren't so pretty. They were really insanely saggy old ladies with very, very saggy skin that kind of dragged on the ground. And so the girl he asked to come to bed with him tied up her skin behind her back with a string to make herself feel more beautiful. And as night fell, she hobbled on over to the king's castle. And they did it. The next morning, as dawn came in through the window and Mr. King woke up and realized who was laying next to him with folds of skin everywhere, he freaked out and threw her out the window, as you would with old ladies. Fortunately for the old lady, she had enough skin to get caught in the tree and to hang by her skin. A couple of fairies came flying by. They found the old lady hanging in the tree by her back skin, so entertaining that they blessed her with beauty, brains, and riches. Now later on, the king goes to the window, looks out, and sees this gorgeous lady sitting in his tree. And what does he do? He says, "You're going to be my wife." And they get married. Now remember, there were 2 old, saggy women in the other castle. What happened to the other saggy woman? The new queen goes to visit her. And the old saggy woman says, "Wait a second, how did you get so beautiful?" And the new queen says, "Well, I just had someone cut my skin off." The old lady went to the butcher and said, "Hey, cut my skin off. I want to grow a new skin. I want to look beautiful." And of course the butcher, being a butcher, does so. And the old lady dies, screaming in pain and bleeding everywhere. The end. Go ahead and sound off in the comments. Tell me what you think of these creepy fairy tales. What creepy fairy tales maybe you've heard. Tell me what you think of fairy tales in general. And now you must subscribe. Now is the part of the show where you subscribe, like, or comment down below. I hope I told these tales well enough for you. My name's Ben. As always,